The shouting came first. A sharp, cracking sound that cut through the jet bridge like a snapped cable under tension. Passengers froze mid-step. A suitcase wheel spun uselessly on the linoleum. And at the center of that sudden, stunned silence stood Sarah Thompson, 54, her hand pressed flat against the chest of the man trying to board ahead of the queue. Her voice trembled with something colder than anger. "Sir, you will step aside. Right now." The man blinked, bewildered, his boarding pass shaking between his fingers. Someone gasped. Someone whispered. And deep in the line, a woman in a charcoal suit looked up, her eyes steady, unreadable, as if she'd been waiting for this moment long before it arrived. Sarah felt every pair of eyes lock onto her. She felt the heat crawl up her neck, the pressure in her ears tightening like a vice. But she didn't back down. She couldn't. Not today. Not after the morning she'd had. Not after the message waiting in her voicemail that she still hadn't dared to replay. She kept her palm firm against the man's chest, her voice clipped as a knife. "You attempted to bypass security protocol. I don't care what group you think you're in." Her junior colleague, Mia Rodriguez, stood behind her, frozen in half-breath, clutching the manifest tablet like a shield. "Sarah," she murmured, barely audible. "Maybe we should just let him—" "No." Sarah didn't even look back. "Procedures exist for a reason." But inside, her pulse thrashed. She wasn't certain whether she was defending the airline, herself, or simply the last boundary she still had control over. The man finally stepped back, hands half raised in surrender, leaving behind a silence thick with judgment. The line moved again, cautiously, like animals skirting a live wire. And the woman in the charcoal suit, quiet, poised, with that unsettling air of someone who could see right through chaos, approached the scanner next. "Good afternoon," she said softly. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind that didn't wilt under pressure, but sharpened instead. Sarah felt her composure wobble for an instant. The woman extended her phone with a steady hand. Her nails were short, practical, her jewelry minimal. Her eyes held no accusation, no fear, only patience. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that patience irritated Sarah more than confrontation ever could. "State your name," Sarah said. "Elaine Harper." Sarah scanned the pass. First class, seat 2A. The seat reserved for the airline's top-tier partners, high-value clients, or seasoned executives who had earned more miles than most people breathed. She studied Elaine's face again. Plain makeup, no designer logos, no visible markers of wealth. Nothing that matched the seat assignment glowing on her screen. The numbers didn't add up, and Sarah despised when things didn't add up. Mia shifted behind her, noticing the pause. "Everything okay?" "Fine." Sarah forced a nod, returning the phone. "Proceed." Elaine stepped past her with a polite smile, but there was a flicker, just a flicker, in her eyes. Recognition? Amusement? Pity? Sarah couldn't tell. She didn't want to tell. Inside the cabin, sunlight spilled through the windows, lighting the polished armrests and the leather headrests in warm gold. The aircraft hummed softly, preparing for takeoff. Sarah walked the aisle with rigid movements, her shoes silent against the carpet as she checked on passengers. Her hands worked from muscle memory. Her mind did not. Her thoughts slid back to the voicemail she'd refused to replay. Her supervisor's voice, low, stern. "Sarah, call me when you can. It's urgent. It affects your seniority status." That word, seniority, echoed like a warning bell. Seniority was her identity, her shield, her proof she had survived decades in a profession that aged people from the inside out. And now, something threatened it. She pushed the thought aside when she reached first class. Elaine Harper sat with her posture straight, her eyes on the window, watching the tarmac as if it were a stage she'd memorized. Next to her was an older man, maybe mid-70s, thin hair combed carefully, his hands folded atop a worn leather briefcase. He nodded when Sarah greeted him. "Mr. Burnett," Sarah said, her voice softening. She'd served him before. A retired aerospace engineer, always polite, always gentle. "Anything I can get you before we push back?" "Just water, thank you," he whispered, then smiled at Elaine. "Looks like you're new to this route." Elaine returned the smile, though it lacked the warmth of familiarity. "First time flying through Dallas in years. Things are different now." Her tone carried weight, a subtle heaviness Sarah didn't miss. She wanted to ask more, but something in Elaine's posture said she wouldn't answer. Not yet. When Sarah stepped behind the galley curtain, Mia followed, lowering her voice. "Are you okay? You're, I don't know, tighter than usual." "I'm fine, Sarah," Mia insisted gently. "You snapped at that man earlier, and you're staring at passengers like they're hiding something." "They are," Sarah said quietly. "Everyone hides something, especially the ones who look calm." Mia blinked. "What are you talking about?" But Sarah didn't answer. She was staring past Mia toward the corner of the galley, where a plain white envelope sat on a metal counter. Nobody else had noticed it yet, but Sarah had. She knew every inch of this aircraft, and that envelope did not belong on Liberty American Airlines property. She reached for it. Her hands trembled. Inside was a printed note. No signature, no header, just a single line typed in a tight serif font. "You cannot protect what is already collapsing." The words gutted her with cold finality. She dropped the paper as if it had burned her skin. Mia lunged forward. "What is that?" "Nothing." Sarah forced the envelope into a trash compartment. "Some joke from the cleaners. Ignore it." But she didn't believe that. Not for a second. And when she looked up, she saw Elaine Harper through the galley curtain gap, watching her with unsettling precision, as if she already knew the envelope had been waiting there. The engines roared to life outside, shaking the cabin. The aircraft began to push back. Passengers settled in. The world narrowed into a steel tube hurtling toward the sky. And still Elaine's gaze held. It was not unkind. It was not fearful. It was knowing. Sarah's breath caught. A cold suspicion curled in her gut, sharp as a blade. Something was happening on this flight. Something she didn't understand yet. And Elaine Harper, quiet, composed, invisible in plain sight, was at the center of it. But the worst part was this. For the first time in 30 years, Sarah Thompson felt like a passenger on her own aircraft. Not in control, not prepared, and absolutely not ready for what waited at 30,000 feet. The climb had only begun. The seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft chime, but no one in first class moved. The tension had settled too deeply, like frost on glass. Even the air felt heavier. Sarah stepped out of the galley, her spine straight, but her breath shallow, carrying a tray of pre-departure drinks she should have delivered 15 minutes earlier. She forced a smile that felt brittle at the edges. The aisle seemed longer than usual, as if the aircraft itself was stretching, testing her resolve. She reached row 1, handed champagne to a couple celebrating their 40th anniversary, then moved to row 2. Mr. Burnett accepted his water with a grateful nod. But when she turned to Elaine Harper, she hesitated. No reason, no trigger, just hesitation, as if some instinct warned her she was about to disturb something she didn't yet understand. Elaine finally looked up, breaking that stillness. Her voice was warm but distant. "Just water. Ice, if you have it." Simple, polite, Yet her eyes lingered a beat too long on Sarah's face, as if searching for something beneath the surface. Sarah nodded and moved on quickly, her pulse a staccato rhythm against her ribs. She didn't trust herself to speak. The envelope was still etched in her mind, those 7 words circling like vultures. You cannot protect what is already collapsing. It echoed with every footstep she took. By the time she returned to the galley, Mia was pacing in a tight loop, her brow creased with quiet panic. "What was in that envelope, Sarah?" Mia whispered. "I told you, nothing." That didn't look like nothing. It was nothing. Mia exhaled, defeated, but her eyes didn't stop searching Sarah's face. "You're shaking." Sarah gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. "I'm fine," she said again, though her voice betrayed her. "Please, just focus on the beverage service. First class expects." "It's not just first class," Mia cut in, her voice suddenly sharper. "Something is off, and you know it." Before Sarah could answer, a sound rippled through the cabin. Not loud, just the subtle shift of bodies turning toward a single point. Then a voice, male, controlled but tense. "Ma'am, you can't be here." It came from the forward lavatory area. Sarah stepped out of the galley just in time to see a man in plain clothes, broad shoulders, cropped hair, a badge chain barely visible beneath his jacket, blocking access to the service corridor. Behind him, a woman with a clipboard attempted to squeeze past. "Sir," she protested, "I told you I'm authorized. This inspection was scheduled before pushback. Authorization doesn't override FAA security protocol during active flight," the man replied. His tone remained low, professional, but unyielding. Passengers stared, whispering. An unscheduled in-flight inspection? That never happened. Not mid-air. Not without prior notice to the crew. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The woman with the clipboard turned, catching Sarah's eye. Her face was pinched with irritation, and something else. Regret. Recognition. As if she'd expected Sarah to be the one to stop her. "Ms. Thompson," the woman said, stepping forward, "I need access to the flight deck records cabinet. I'm with Corporate Compliance, Dallas headquarters. You should have received an internal memo this morning." A cold film washed over Sarah's skin. She hadn't checked her messages, not after the voicemail, not after the bitter taste of dread that sat on her tongue all morning. She swallowed. "We didn't receive anything," she said, her voice quiet. That was all the plainclothes man, clearly Federal Air Marshal, needed to hear. "Ma'am, step back. Any unauthorized approach toward restricted access during flight is prohibited." Corporate compliance. An in-flight inspection. Headquarters involvement. Sarah's heart raced. Something larger was happening. Something she had not been prepared for. The passengers watched with unnerving silence, their curiosity sharpening the air. Then, from row 2, Elaine Harper spoke. Not loudly, not urgently, but with a composure that cut through the tension like a clean blade. "Let her through." Every head turned. The marshal stiffened. "Ma'am, with respect, you don't have the authority to—" "Check your comms," Elaine said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the calm certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone whose words tended to align with consequences. A beat passed. Then another. The marshal pressed a finger to his earpiece. His face changed, not dramatically, but subtly. A shift only someone trained to read fear or power would notice. He stepped aside. "Proceed," he said quietly to the compliance officer. Mia's eyes snapped toward Sarah. Sarah's breath halted. Elaine turned back toward the window, her expression unreadable, as if nothing of significance had occurred. But something had. Something enormous. Sarah forced herself to move again. Coffee service, hot towels, anything to ground herself. Yet every time she passed row 2, she felt watched, not by Elaine's eyes, but by the certainty radiating from her. A certainty that made no sense for a quiet, unimposing woman who supposedly held a single seat on a random afternoon flight. Half an hour later, turbulence rolled through the cabin, gentle at first, then sharper. The aircraft shook, rattling glasses and startling the couple in row 1. Sarah steadied herself on a seat back, her training kicking in. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your belts fastened." The lights flickered, then dimmed. Passengers murmured. The hum of the engines remained steady, but the atmosphere shifted. Something electrical. Something off. From the galley, the interphone chimed, a piercing tone used only during in-flight emergencies. Sarah snatched it up. "Flight deck," Captain Willis said, his voice tight, strained. "We're experiencing a systems irregularity. I need status on cabin power and any interference near the forward panels." "Interference?" Sarah repeated, glancing unconsciously toward the corridor where the compliance officer had gone. "You heard me. Report back." The line clicked dead. Sarah stood frozen. Systems irregularity, electrical interference, and an inspection officer accessing components only engineering teams typically touched. She turned toward row 2. Elaine was already looking at her, as if she knew exactly what the captain had said. The aircraft jolted again. A tray slid off a counter and crashed to the floor. Someone in the back screamed. The marshal stood abruptly, one hand braced on the overhead bin. Elaine rose from her seat, not dramatically, but with intention. "Miss Thompson," she said softly, "we need to speak. Now." Sarah's throat dried. "About what?" "About what your airline has been hiding, and why someone put that envelope on this aircraft." The world seemed to tilt. Sarah grabbed the nearest headrest to steady herself. "What do you know about the envelope?" she whispered. Elaine's gaze didn't waver. It had none of the polite softness she'd shown earlier. No warmth, only certainty. "Everything," she said. Behind her, the lights flickered once more, longer this time. Passengers gripped their armrests. Someone whispered a prayer. The marshal began moving toward the galley, urgency in his stride. Elaine didn't blink. "You've been targeted, Miss Thompson," she said quietly. "And this flight isn't the problem. What's waiting for us in Dallas is." The aircraft shuddered, a deep, mechanical groan reverberating through its spine. Sarah felt her pulse thunder in her ears. Because for the first time since she began flying 30 years ago, she was afraid. Not of crashing, not of turbulence, but of the truth, and of the woman standing before her, who seemed to hold it in the palm of her hand. The cabin lights steadied for a moment, casting a thin wash of gold over faces tense with unspoken fear. The turbulence tapered, but the unease did not. It clung to the air like a fine mist, settling into the creases of every breath. Sarah stood motionless beside row 2, her pulse a trembling drum beneath her uniform. Elaine Harper's eyes held hers with a focus that felt surgical, unblinking, precise. "Walk with me," Elaine said quietly. It was not a request. Sarah felt her feet move before her mind did. They slipped into the narrow aisle, stepping toward the galley. Behind them, Mr. Burnett watched, concern creasing his lined face. The older man's fingers tightened around the leather briefcase resting on his lap. "Is everything all right?" he called gently. Elaine turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. "For now," she said. "Please remain seated, Mr. Burnett." Her tone was soft, but it carried an authority that made the older man obey without question. In the galley, the air felt colder, almost metallic. The hum of electrical panels buzzed louder than usual. One of the overhead screens flickered, showing cabin pressurization levels wavering before stabilizing again. Mia glanced up and nearly dropped the stack of cups in her hands. "Sarah," she whispered, stepping closer. "The captain needs another systems check. He said something about crossfeed valves not responding. Should we?" "Later," Elaine said before Sarah could speak. Mia blinked. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Elaine didn't answer. Her attention stayed locked on Sarah. "Open the trash compartment," she murmured. Sarah's chest tightened. The envelope, those 7 words. She hesitated, then pulled the latch. The compartment door clicked open with a hollow sound. The envelope was gone. Her breath hitched. "What?" Elaine lifted a finger, silencing her. "You didn't imagine it. But someone doesn't want it found." Sarah recoiled, as if the metal edge had burned her. Why would someone plant it at all? And why on this flight? Elaine studied her for a moment, her expression drawing tighter, as if weighing what to reveal. "Because this aircraft is carrying something more valuable than passengers." Mia stared between them, her confusion deepening. "What does that mean?" Before Elaine could answer, the forward interphone shrieked. Captain Willis's voice blasted through, strained, barely holding steady. "Senior attendant forward! Now!" Sarah's blood iced. She moved toward the phone, but when she grasped it, the static on the line crackled over every word the captain attempted to say. Behind her, Elaine stepped into the galley shadows, watching with unnerving calm. "Captain, say again," Sarah said. More static, a burst of sound, then faint but unmistakable. "It's not a system's fault. Someone accessed." The line cut out. Mia slapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh God." Sarah felt the world tilt underneath her. She braced against the counter. This wasn't turbulence. The aircraft was banking, by design, not accident. The engines roared at an unfamiliar pitch. They weren't climbing. They weren't descending. They were turning. Elaine stepped forward, gripping the edge of the galley to steady herself. Her voice stayed impossibly steady. "He's diverting." Sarah swallowed hard. "Why? We're not in danger." Elaine's expression didn't change. "He thinks you are." A thud sounded from the forward corridor, the area near the avionics access panel. A panel that only flight crew or authorized engineers could open in flight. Mia jolted, eyes wide. What was that? The marshal appeared. His voice low, clipped. "Gunny, now." He pulled Sarah and Mia out of view of the cabin, closing the curtain with one swift motion. The moment they were alone, his composure faltered. Just slightly. Enough to reveal urgency lurking beneath the calm. "One of the maintenance panels shows forced access," he said. "Can either of you explain that?" Sarah shook her head. "No, absolutely not." Mia whispered, "Is someone trying to sabotage the flight?" The marshal ignored the question. His eyes narrowed at Sarah, almost accusatory. "You threw something away earlier. What was it?" Sarah felt her entire throat close. She couldn't speak. Elaine stepped in before she could try. "It was a note." The marshal's head snapped toward her. "And who exactly are you to know that?" "I'm someone who understands what's happening." Elaine said the words without fear, without hesitation. "And your captain has already received instructions from ground operations." "You should check again." The marshal pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece. A second passed, then 3. His jaw tightened. His breath hitched. Instructions had come through, and they weren't his. He looked at Elaine with new eyes. Fear, suspicion, something else. Respect, maybe. "You need to tell me who you are," he said. Elaine didn't blink. Not yet. The marshal braced a hand against the wall as another shudder ran through the aircraft. A harder one this time. Glasses rattled. Someone yelped in the cabin. A flight attendant in coach shouted for passengers to stay seated. We're over Tennessee airspace, the marshal muttered. If he's diverting, he should be turning toward Memphis or Louisville. But he's not. Sarah felt dread crawl up her spine. Then where is he taking us? Dallas, Elaine said softly. But Dallas is our destination, Mia said. Elaine shook her head. Not the airport. Silence gripped them. Then the marshal's radio crackled again, muffled but urgent, his face drained of color. He turned toward Sarah, his voice tightening. The captain needs you at the flight deck, now. I can't enter mid-flight, Sarah whispered. You can today, the marshal said. He requested you by name. By name? Sarah felt her knees weaken. What does he want? The marshal hesitated. He said he needs to confirm whether you're part of this. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. Part of what? Sarah demanded. What the hell is going on? Elaine stepped forward again, her voice low. Go. He won't open that door for anyone else. What do you know about what's happening? Sarah's voice cracked, fear bleeding through. Just tell me why this flight, why me, why any of this? Elaine's eyes softened. Barely. Like the flicker of a candle behind glass. Because someone has been watching you for months, she said. And whatever they put in that envelope, it wasn't the beginning. It was the warning. The aircraft suddenly lurched, dropping sharply before stabilizing. Passengers screamed. Overhead bins rattled. The marshal grabbed the handle above him to stay upright. Go! He barked. Sarah stumbled toward the forward corridor, gripping seatbacks as she passed. Every passenger's eyes followed her, fearful, confused, suspicious. When she reached row 2, she caught a final glimpse of Elaine. Elaine nodded once. Not reassurance. Permission. Something inside Sarah fractured and reshaped in a single breath. She walked the rest of the distance without touching a single seat, without letting her knees buckle, without allowing the tremor in her hands to show. She reached the reinforced flight deck door, lifted the interphone. Captain Willis, she whispered. I'm here. There was a long silence, then a click, then the captain's voice, raspy, strained, but unmistakably resolute. Ms. Thompson, he said, this isn't a diversion. This is containment. And before I open this door, I need to know exactly what you've gotten yourself into. The lock whirred. The door cracked open. And Sarah stepped into a truth she had spent 30 years flying above, never imagining it would one day drag her out of the sky. The door sealed behind her with a heavy, metallic thud, shutting out the noise of the cabin. The cockpit was dim, except for the harsh glow of warning lights pulsing across the instrument panels. Captain Willis sat rigid in his seat, jaw clenched, one hand braced against the throttle, as if steadying the aircraft by sheer force of will. First Officer Green's palms hovered above the controls, trembling slightly, eyes darting between failing indicators. Neither man looked surprised to see her. That terrified her more than anything. Sit down, Sarah, the captain said quietly. His voice was stripped of its usual warmth, stripped of everything except duty. She lowered herself into the jump seat, hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. Captain Willis didn't turn toward her. He kept his gaze forward, fixed on the horizon line, though every instrument betrayed a different truth. I need you to tell me exactly what you've been contacted about, he said. And I need you to do it now. Sarah shook her head. Nothing. I haven't been contacted by anyone. Green let out a short, bitter breath. Then why did Dallas Dispatch send a coded message about you? Why is corporate compliance running an active audit during flight? Why did a federal marshal board with a sealed directive naming you as a possible breach point? A ringing built in her ears. She could barely breathe. Captain Willis pressed a button, switching the display. A document flickered to life across the secondary monitor. Dense text, encrypted headers, her name stamped across the top. Sarah Thompson, subject of internal review. Alleged involvement, data irregularities, protocol violations, potential link to unauthorized network access originating from crew terminals. "Now," she whispered. "No, that isn't. I didn't do anything." The captain finally turned, his eyes full of exhaustion she hadn't seen before. "That message came through an hour before takeoff. You were supposed to be grounded pending investigation. The only reason you're on this aircraft is because the system flagged your check-in as valid when it shouldn't have." Her pulse hammered. "I wasn't told anything." Green leaned toward her, searching her face. "Think carefully. Is there anything at all, that could make someone target you? A login you didn't make, a file you didn't recognize, a badge swipe you didn't perform?" She shook her head so violently it hurt. "No, I follow procedure. I always follow procedure." Captain Willis studied her, and something in the weight of his gaze shifted, from suspicion to calculation. He tapped another switch. The aircraft shuddered as the autopilot disengaged. He took manual control, hands steady despite the chaos flashing across the displays. "This isn't about you," he said. "It's about whoever wants access through you." The temperature in the cockpit seemed to drop. Sarah felt something cold unravel in her stomach. Access to what? Before either pilot could answer, the aircraft jerked violently. Warning alarms shrieked. The oxygen masks dropped in the cabin behind them with a muffled chorus of mechanical thuds. The entire fuselage groaned as though something enormous dragged its weight across the skin of the aircraft. "Loss of cabin pressure. Partial breach," Green read from the panel, his voice shaking. "Starboard side. Not structural. System-initiated lockdown. System initiated." Sarah looked up sharply. That meant it wasn't from outside. The aircraft itself had triggered the seal. Someone had told it to. The captain's hands tightened on the yoke. "Shut down all auxiliary network channels. Secure cockpit data. If someone's trying to pull flight deck access remotely, we cut them off now." Green typed rapidly. His face paled. "Sir, the firewall isn't responding. Something's overriding it from the maintenance diagnostic port." "That's impossible." The captain's voice hardened. "That port can only be accessed before pushback." He stopped. Sarah closed her eyes. The sound earlier. The compliance officer at the panel, the marshal blocking her, the envelope that vanished. Someone had been in the systems, not to harm the aircraft, to reach something inside it. Green swallowed. "Captain, someone else is on the network." The cockpit lights dimmed, flickered, then stabilized. A new message appeared across the central display in stark white letters. "Flight data handover in progress. No crew authorized required." The captain slammed his fist against the console. "Not on my aircraft!" He fought the controls, leveling them, forcing the aircraft back onto its path. Green rerouted what systems he could, sweat beading on his forehead. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What data? What are they trying to take?" The captain answered without looking at her. 12 hours ago, an encrypted archive was loaded into the avionics bay under order from corporate security. I don't know what's in it. They wouldn't tell me. They only said it had national-level clearance. Sarah felt her skin prickle. Why is it on a passenger flight? Because they wanted to hide it, Green whispered. No one checks a routine afternoon flight to Dallas. The aircraft lurched again as the autopilot fought to re-engage. Willis forced it off. He turned to Sarah, eyes fierce. And whoever planted that envelope knew you'd find it, knew it would destabilize you, knew the audit would be pinned to your name. They needed a distraction, someone the system would tag as a weak point, a scapegoat. Her throat constricted. Someone is framing me. No, the captain said softly. Someone is using you. The cockpit door buzzer sounded, a sharp, insistent buzz that made all three of them jump. Someone stood outside. The marshal's voice came through, steady but urgent. Open the door, now. Green looked at the captain. Do we? The captain hit the intercom. Identify. There was a pause. Then the marshal spoke again, but his tone had changed. Low, controlled, carrying the weight of information they hadn't given him. We need to talk about the passenger in 2A. Sarah felt her heart seize. The cockpit fell silent. Say what you mean, the captain demanded. Another pause. Then, unmistakably, she's not who she says she is. Sarah felt the floor tilt again, but not from turbulence, from truth closing in. The captain glanced at her. Green swallowed hard. The marshal's voice returned, firmer. And if you don't open this door, Captain, you're going to lose control of this aircraft. Not because of sabotage, because of authority. Sarah's breath trembled. Elaine Harper. The quiet confidence, the command in her voice. The marshal finished. 2A outranks everyone on this plane, even you. The cockpit alarms wailed again, but none of them moved. Sarah understood only one thing. Whatever Elaine was, she wasn't a passenger. And Sarah had just stepped into the center of a storm no one on board was meant to survive unchanged. The cockpit door unlocked with a heavy metallic snap, the kind that made the skin along Sarah's arms rise in a cold wave. Captain Willis hesitated only a breath before pulling it open. The marshal stepped inside, closing it behind him with the deliberate care of someone sealing off a crime scene. His face was different now. No calm professionalism, no stoic restraint. Something darker flickered beneath his eyes. Not fear. Recognition. She asked me to come forward, he said quietly. The captain squared his shoulders. Why? The marshal looked at Sarah first. Too long, too intently. Then he turned back to Willis. Because she wants this aircraft stabilized before she speaks, and because she doesn't want to trigger a chain reaction you can't reverse. Green let out a hollow laugh. We already passed that point about 10 minutes ago. The marshal ignored him. 2A isn't just a passenger. She's the federal liaison overseeing the security audit your airline was ordered to comply with. The entire flight was selected weeks ago, not randomly. Willis's jaw tightened. He kept both hands on the yoke, fighting the aircraft through another gust of erratic turbulence. You're telling me she arranged this? The systems breach? The data override? No, the marshal said. But she knew the breach was coming. The cockpit fell silent again, thick and suffocating. Green stared at the marshal, stunned. And you're just now telling us this? She didn't want to panic, the marshal snapped. She didn't want the crew compromised. She didn't want collateral damage. Sarah pressed back into the jump seat, feeling the weight of every word. It wrapped around her chest like wire. What kind of audit requires this level of secrecy? The marshal looked at her, finally softening. The kind that deals with the people above your airline. The kind that handles national data distribution. The kind that expects retaliation from inside your own infrastructure. Retaliation. Sarah felt the hard knot forming in her stomach. Green wiped his forehead, staring at a flashing alert. Sir, the network is still being accessed. We're losing control of subsystem routing. By who? Sarah whispered. No one spoke. The aircraft jolted hard, so hard Green swore under his breath. The nose dipped, the engines growled. Something deep inside the aircraft vibrated. Not turbulence, but a mechanical shudder, like gears grinding under stress. Then, the forward avionics monitor flickered. a new message appeared. Failover route enabled. Data transfer protected. Manual intervention prohibited. Willis slammed a fist into the console. I swear on every hour I've flown, if someone is using this aircraft as a smokescreen. They are, the marshal said. They already have. He stepped closer to Willis. The woman in 2A has the clearance to stop them, but she needs access to the flight deck. Sarah's breath froze. The captain's grip on the yoke tightened. Not happening. It has to. She outranks me. She outranks you. She outranks the board of your airline. And the leak she's here to intercept is already halfway to being irreversible. No, Willis said, voice sharp as a snapped cable. This is my flight. It stopped being your flight the moment your system was breached, the marshal said. You're holding it in the sky, but she's the only one who can stop what's being taken on the ground. What is being taken? Green demanded. The marshal pointed to the captain's encrypted message file. Everything tied to that archive. Everything stored by your security division. Everything your airline has failed to protect for the past 6 months. Sarah's throat constricted. What does that have to do with me? The marshal didn't look away. They used your ID to infiltrate the system, your credentials, your terminal access, your seniority. The sabotage wasn't framed on you. His voice dropped. They built it on you. Sarah felt the breath punched from her chest. Green whispered, horrified. Someone planted access logs under her ID. That means the breach started long before the flight. Willis muttered, which explains the audit. Sarah closed her eyes. She remembered every shift, every login, every time she'd swiped her badge while exhausted, every time she'd let a junior attendant use her terminal while she ran a pre-flight check, every moment she'd trusted a system she believed was stable. No, she whispered. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, the marshal said softly. And so does she. Elaine. Sarah's pulse hammered so violently it hurt. The marshal stepped back toward the door. She's coming forward. The moment this aircraft stabilizes, she'll enter the cockpit. Green looked up sharply. Stabilizes? We're losing altitude. The altimeter ticked downward in tiny, relentless increments. Willis bit down a curse. Damn it, the elevator controls are lagging. Green, reroute hydraulic assist. I'm trying, Green said, fingers flying across switches. It's not responding. The marshal braced himself as the plane dipped again. This is why she didn't come forward earlier. If she steps in without the systems steady, passengers could see her. Or worse, someone watching the internal feed could identify her. Identify her as what? Willis demanded. Before the marshal could answer, the interphone chimed. One long, continuous tone reserved for only one type of call. A direct override from the cabin crew. The marshal froze. Sarah answered. A single voice came through. Elaine Harper. Captain, you need to level the aircraft within 2 minutes, or the failover route will finalize. And if it finalizes, Dallas won't be a safe landing zone anymore. Willis barked back. We're working on it. Why the hell won't the hydraulics comply? They're being redirected, Elaine said. Someone inside your system requested alternate routing, but they overplayed their hand. They left a signature, one I can trace. Green looked at Willis. If we let her in. Not yet, Willis snapped. Elaine continued, calm as still water. You don't have time to debate this. Open the secondary circuit breaker panel. Reset the auxiliary bus. You'll regain partial control. Green hesitated. That'll kill power to half the avionics. It'll give me an entry point to stop the override. Willis inhaled, eyes flicking over his failing control board. Do it. Green yanked the switch. The cockpit plunged into a brief, terrifying blackout. Every warning light died. Every panel went blank. For 2 seconds, the aircraft flew blind. Then the lights flickered back. Most displays rebooted. Not all, but enough. Willis regained pitch control. The aircraft leveled, climbing slightly, stabilizing through the airflow. In the galley outside, passengers cried out at the sudden equilibrium. Green exhaled in relief. She was right. The marshal moved to the door. She usually is. Sarah stared. Who is she? He met her eyes. You'll find out before we land. But understand this. What she's walking into now isn't just an audit. He reached for the handle. It's a trap. He opened the cockpit door. Elaine Harper stepped inside. Sarah felt the temperature in the cockpit shift the instant Elaine stepped through the door, as if the air itself recognized the authority she carried. Elaine didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply entered, closed the door behind her, and let the silence stretch until even the warning buzzers seemed to hold their breath. Captain Willis turned to face her, jaw set, but some deeper caution flickered behind his eyes. First Officer Green looked overwhelmed, trying to reconcile the composed woman standing before him with the chaos unspooling across his screens. The marshal stood closest to her, posture straight, as though her presence realigned his purpose. Elaine took one step forward. Captain, your aircraft is stable for the moment, but the breach hasn't stopped. It's adapting. Green swallowed. Adapting to what? To us, she said. The word landed like a blow. Sarah pushed herself deeper into the jump seat, trying to steady her breath. Elaine's gaze moved to her with that same unsettling precision, as if measuring every fracture inside her. Not judging, not accusing, studying. Captain Willis folded his arms, grounding himself. Before anything else, I need to know who you are. You already know, she said. You just don't have the clearance to say it aloud. Willis stiffened. Green froze mid-keystroke. The marshal didn't flinch. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't know what Elaine meant, but the certainty in her voice carried the weight of a classified truth. Elaine turned to the flight deck screens. Show me the last 30 seconds of system logs. Green obeyed before he even realized he was moving. Lines of encrypted code scrolled across the display, pulsing with activity. Elaine leaned closer. There, that string. That's not sabotage. That's a relay signal. Willis frowned. A relay to what? Elaine tapped the screen. To a repository your airline never declared. An off-ledger storage node created for one purpose: to hide something. Something someone didn't want federal oversight to see. Green looked up sharply. You're saying Liberty American Airlines is running a shadow database? I'm saying someone inside the airline is, Elaine replied. And they used your crew terminals to mask their access. Primarily hers. Sarah flinched, a tremor running through her. I didn't give anyone access. I didn't even know a system like that existed. I believe you, Elaine said. But the people who built the breach didn't need your permission. They needed your reliability, your spotless record, your predictable routines, and your senior authority to terminals no one questions. The marshal stepped forward. Do you know who is behind it? Elaine met his eyes. I know who benefits, but I don't know which one of them initiated today's transfer yet. Yet, he repeated, nodding. Willis interrupted, voice low. If the data is being transferred off the aircraft, can we stop it? Elaine paused. Yes, but not from here. The aircraft jolted again, though only lightly this time. Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Something about the small vibrations felt wrong. Not turbulent, not mechanical. Intentional. Like someone tapping the hull from the inside, searching for weaknesses. Elaine looked at Willis. Captain, what's our time to Dallas on the current trajectory? Less than an hour if systems hold, Willis said. More if they don't. They won't. Elaine gestured to the screen. The breach is cycling. Every time you stabilize control, it adjusts to regain leverage. It's not trying to crash us. It's trying to isolate us. Sarah felt her stomach twist. Why isolate us? Elaine turned toward her slowly. Because the moment we land, every federal agency monitoring this flight is going to converge on the aircraft. Whoever engineered the leak knows that. If they isolate us, digitally, procedurally, or physically, they buy themselves time to erase evidence. Green's voice cracked. Then what are we supposed to do? Fly circles until they win? No, Elaine said. We trigger the manual override at the avionics bay. That cuts network access entirely. Willis shook his head. You can't reach the avionics bay in flight. The Marshal can, she said. Green blinked. That's insane. You'd have to go through the forward crawl space while we're mid-air. One wrong move and... It's the only option. The Marshal stepped closer. If that will stop the transfer, I'll do it. Sarah stared at him. It's suicidal. I've done worse, he said. Elaine didn't smile, didn't soften, but something in her expression shifted. A quiet acknowledgement of the risk he was accepting. Then she turned back to Sarah. You'll go with him. Sarah jerked back, knocking into the jump seat. What? Why me? Because, Elaine said, the system recognizes your ID. If the breach detects the Marshal alone, it will lock him out. But it doesn't recognize you as a threat. It reads you as the conduit. She said conduit the way someone else might say cornerstone or target. Willis shook his head. Absolutely not. She's a flight attendant, not network security. She's the only one who can get the Marshal through the bypass panel without triggering the secondary lockdown, Elaine replied. If the lockdown engages, we lose control of every major system until touchdown, if we even make it that far. Sarah felt the cockpit tightening around her, shrinking until all she could feel was the heat of her own breath. I'm not trained for this. I don't know anything about avionics. You don't have to, Elaine said. You just have to open a door. The simplicity of that sentence terrified her more than anything else. Green whispered, Captain, she's right. Willis rubbed a hand across his face, fighting a war inside himself. Duty, logic, fear. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, past the uniform, past the years, past the unspoken fractures beneath her practiced composure. Can you do it? He asked quietly. She tried to answer. No sound came out. Elaine stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Sarah could hear. Someone chose you because they thought you would break. Prove them wrong. Sarah inhaled unsteadily. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred for just a second. Then she nodded. Not because she felt brave, because something inside her refused to be used again. Elaine stepped back. Marshal, prepare to move. Miss Thompson, follow him. Don't stop unless the captain orders you, and don't touch anything except the panel door. Willis tightened his grip on the controls. When the network drops, the plane will lurch. Hard. Brace yourselves. The Marshal opened the cockpit door, scanning the aisle before stepping out. Sarah followed him on trembling legs, every muscle taut with dread. As she crossed the threshold, she looked back one last time. Elaine watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Part resolve, part apology, part something deeper. Sarah turned away before fear could catch up. She walked down the aisle toward the forward hatch. Passengers stared at her, confused, anxious, sensing the tension but not understanding its shape. To them, she was just a flight attendant. To the system, she was the breach. To Elaine, she was the key. The Marshal opened the service hatch. Sarah stepped into the narrow crawl space, heart pounding, knowing one truth with absolute clarity. Whatever waited on the other side of that dark tunnel wasn't just wires and panels. It was the person who had been hiding behind her credentials. And the moment she opened that door, she would face them. The crawl space swallowed her in a breathless dark, a cramped metal throat running beneath the skin of the aircraft. The air smelled of cold alloy and recycled oxygen. Every surface vibrated faintly with the thrum of engines fighting to hold altitude. The marshal crawled ahead of her, his shoulders nearly scraping the walls, a small utility light clipped to his vest, casting a narrow beam into the tight corridor. "Stay close," he said, voice low but steady. Sarah stayed close. Too close. Her knees slid across the ribbed flooring, her palms catching dust no passenger ever imagined existed on a polished commercial jet. Her breaths came shallow and fast, but she forced each one quieter than the last. Panic had no room in a space this narrow, or in a moment this dangerous. They reached a junction where the corridor widened enough to crouch. The marshal lifted a panel. Beneath it, wires and connectors glowed with intermittent pulses, yellow, white, red, all the signs of an aircraft's heartbeat. Yet threaded through the hum was something else, a faint, rhythmic clicking that didn't belong. The marshal paused, listening. That's manual access. Someone's in the bay. Sarah's stomach dropped. Inside? Now? Yes, he whispered. And they're not supposed to be. He killed the utility light. They were plunged into dim red emergency glow strips, barely enough to see each other's eyes. The clicking continued, steady, confident. Whoever was inside wasn't improvising. They knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah whispered, "Is it the compliance officer?" Unlikely. She wouldn't bypass protocol. Then who? Quiet, he breathed. He pointed to another hatch, smaller, bolted from their side. Behind that panel is the avionics service bay. Your badge gives access to the first lock. I'll handle the second. Sarah's pulse rose to a tremor. What if whoever's in there hears us? The marshal's expression didn't change. They already know someone's coming. What matters is whether they expect you. The corridor felt colder. She swallowed hard and moved toward the hatch. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the badge reader beside it. Mia's voice echoed faintly in her memory. You're shaking. She was shaking now too, but she slid her badge anyway. A soft beep, green light, a click. The first lock released. The clicking on the other side of the panel stopped abruptly. Silence pooled thick and deep. The marshal leaned close to her ear. Step back. He unlatched the secondary lock. Another click. A subtle hiss of depressurized air from the sealed compartment. He pushed the panel inward, just enough to peer through the crack. Sarah held her breath. The marshal's muscles tensed, then relaxed, just barely. He motioned for her to follow. The avionics bay was bigger than the crawl space, lit by pale panels that cast long, sharp shadows over the racks of circuitry. The noise of the aircraft here was louder, a layered hum punctuated by electronic whirs. But standing near the central wiring column was a figure she recognized. Mr. Burnett. The quiet older man from seat 2B, the retired aerospace engineer, the man who smiled gently at everyone, who asked for water politely, who held a briefcase like it carried his life inside. He wasn't gentle now. His hands worked with precision on an exposed module, a diagnostic tool clipped into the aircraft's architecture. He did not startle when the hatch opened. He turned instead, slowly, calmly, eyes narrowing with the resigned acknowledgement of someone who knew confrontation was inevitable. The marshal stood between him and Sarah. Step away from the panel. Mr. Burnett tilted his head. You're too late. The transfer is nearly complete. His voice lacked the tremor of age now. It was steadier, colder, carrying an intelligence that no longer cared to stay hidden. Sarah felt her breath scrape her throat. You were watching everything. On purpose. Mr. Burnett's gaze moved to her, softening, not kindly, but with a strange sort of regret. You were never meant to be harmed. You were simply the perfect access point. Trusted, predictable, invisible in the shadows of corporate machinery. The marshal lifted his weapon. Move away, now! Mr. Burnett did step back, 2 small paces, but his expression didn't change. The archive contains what should have been released long ago. Your airline stole it, buried it, and people suffered because of it. Sarah's voice shook. What are you talking about? Truth, he said simply. Suppressed for profit. The aircraft shuddered again, this time from deep inside the bay. The module Burnett had been working on emitted a rising whine as data packets surged through it. Elaine's voice crackled through the marshal's radio. Status? The marshal answered without taking his eyes off Burnett. We found him. Stop the transfer, she said sharply. You have less than 1 minute. Burnett smiled faintly. She's brilliant, you know. Sharper than anyone expected. She was always the only real threat. The marshal moved forward. What did you do to the system? Burnett raised both hands in surrender, but his eyes slid meaningfully toward Sarah. I gave it a key. One it thinks belongs to her. Sarah staggered. Why me? Because you were trustworthy, he said. And trust is easy to exploit. The marshal lunged for the diagnostic tool, but Burnett stepped sideways, faster than a man his age should have been able to move. His hand hit a switch on the wiring rack. The aircraft lurched violently. Sirens wailed in the bay. Panels flickered. Warnings cascaded. Burnett shouted over the mechanical roar. You cannot stop the truth from leaving this plane! The marshal tore the device free, sparks flying as he ripped it from the port. The aircraft jolted upward in response, then steadied. Elaine's voice cut through the static. Transfer interrupted. Systems stabilizing. Sarah sagged against the wall, trembling with the aftershock of fear. Burnett dropped to his knees, exhausted, defeated. It was never about money, he whispered. It was about forcing responsibility. The marshal cuffed his hands. Save it for the ground. But Burnett lifted his head, fixing Sarah with a gaze that froze her blood. They're still going to blame you, he said quietly. That part was set long before today. Her breath broke. What? You were their insurance, he said. The perfect scapegoat for a breach they created themselves. The marshal dragged him toward the crawlspace, but Burnett kept speaking until his voice faded into the metallic corridor. You should have asked why your supervisor never returned your call. The words struck her harder than turbulence ever could. Sarah collapsed back against the avionics rack, her knees shaking as truth, dark, jagged, unavoidable, began threading itself into her bones. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't random. This wasn't even about the archive alone. It was about her. Someone on the ground wanted her destroyed, and the person who knew why was waiting at 30,000 feet, sealed behind a cockpit door she wasn't sure she wanted to open again. Sarah followed the marshal back through the crawlspace, but her legs felt hollow, every movement echoing with Burnett's final words. You should have asked why your supervisor never returned your call. The line replayed in her mind like a warning she'd missed long before boarding this aircraft. By the time they reached the service hatch, her palms were slick with sweat, her breath short and uneven. The marshal opened the hatch and guided her back into the forward galley, closing it behind them with a heavy, metallic latch that felt too loud in the quiet space. The passengers sensed something had shifted the moment she stepped into view. Their eyes widened. Their voices dropped to murmurs. They didn't know what happened, but they could feel it in their bones. The air carried it. fear threaded with the sharp metallic scent of crisis, barely contained. Mia rushed forward from the mid-cabin, grabbing Sarah's arms. "Are you okay? Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah tried to answer, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. The marshal intervened, his tone clipped but controlled. "She's fine. We need to secure the cabin. No movement until further instruction." Mia glanced at him, at Sarah, then back toward first class. "What about the passenger who collapsed?" Sarah blinked. "Collapsed?" Mia nodded, wide-eyed. "It just happened, row 3. He stood up to get his bag, said he felt dizzy, then hit the floor. I called medical assistance, but the doctor on board isn't sure what triggered it." The marshal swore under his breath. "Where is he now?" "In the bulkhead row. We're monitoring his breathing. It's shallow." Sarah's heart slammed harder. "What caused it?" Mia shook her head helplessly. "No idea. But the timing, Sarah. Something's wrong." The marshal's jaw clenched. "We need to alert the cockpit." As he reached for the interphone, the cabin lights flickered again, brighter this time, then dimmed to a warm amber. The hum of the engines lowered, smoothing into a steady vibration that actually felt reassuring. Sarah steadied herself on the galley counter. Elaine appeared in the aisle. She didn't rush. She didn't look frazzled. She moved with a precise, deliberate calm that cut through the cabin's panic like a clean blade. When the marshal saw her, he stepped aside almost instinctively. Elaine approached Sarah first. "What happened in the bay?" Sarah forced herself to breathe. It was Burnett. He was overriding the system. He used my ID to mask the breach. Elaine nodded once, as though she'd already pieced that together before hearing it. "And the transfer?" "Interrupted," Sarah said. "But he said this wasn't just about the archive. He said someone on the ground, someone inside the airline was framing me. On purpose." Elaine studied her closely, her gaze weighing truth, fear, the tremor in Sarah's voice. "Did he say who?" "No," Sarah swallowed. "But he said my supervisor never called back because it wasn't meant to be resolved. I was being set up." Elaine's eyes hardened by a fraction. "That part aligns with what I suspected." Sarah froze. "You suspected? Unexplained in the cockpit," Elaine said. "But there's something we need to address first." She stepped past her, heading toward row 3. The man on the floor was pale, breathing in shallow, irregular gulps. His wife knelt beside him, trembling, her hands hovering helplessly over his chest. Elaine approached slowly, her expression softening. "Ma'am, may I?" The woman nodded quickly, wiping her eyes. He couldn't catch his breath, and then he collapsed." Elaine knelt beside him, placing 2 fingers along his neck, checking his pulse with practiced steadiness. Without looking up, she said, "He needs oxygen. Now." Mia sprinted back to the galley for the portable tank. Sarah followed her, grabbing the cylinder with shaking hands. Together they returned, Mia attaching the mask while Elaine adjusted the airflow. The man took a long, gasping inhale. His wife sobbed with relief. But Elaine's focus stayed sharp, assessing him, not just medically, but with a deeper intent. The marshal leaned down. "You think this is related?" Elaine nodded faintly. "Yes. His symptoms match acute stress-induced collapse, but the timing is too precise to ignore. Someone needed a distraction. They needed us slowed down." Sarah's voice dropped. "To stop us from reaching the truth?" Elaine rose to her feet. "Or to force it out sooner." The aircraft vibrated again. Not turbulence, but a deliberate shift. The engines adjusted pitch. Green's voice came through the overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning an unscheduled descent. Please remain seated." Passengers gasped, gripping armrests. The man who had collapsed took another steady breath, color slowly returning to his face. Sarah felt her pulse spike. Why are we descending? Dallas is still far. Elaine's eyes locked onto hers. Because they're preparing to intercept the flight. Sarah's breath caught. Who? Elaine gestured toward the window. Look outside. Sarah moved to row 1 and leaned near the glass. A distant shape, dark, angular, cut through the clouds beside them. Then another, sleek, fast, military. Sarah's blood turned cold. Are those? Yes, Elaine said behind her. Fighter escorts. They were scrambled the moment the breach was detected. They're here to force a controlled landing. Nia clutched her chest. Oh my God. The marshal exhaled. It's become a federal incident. Elaine stepped forward, her posture settling into something unmistakably authoritative, something no longer hidden. Ms. Thompson, you're coming with me to the flight deck. Sarah shook her head. Why? I've done everything you asked. I'm not. Elaine cut her off, gently but firmly. Because when those jets escort us down, the first person authorities will question is you. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. Me? Yes, Elaine said. Unless you walk into that cockpit now and let me clear your name before we touch the ground. The marshal gestured toward the flight deck door. She's right. Once we land, they'll treat you as the breach until proven otherwise. Sarah's hands trembled. Her voice cracked. I don't know if I can walk back in there. Elaine stepped closer, lowering her voice with unexpected softness. They built their plan on the assumption that you would break before the truth surfaced. Don't give them what they expect. Sarah lifted her eyes, meeting Elaine's. There was something fierce there, conviction, strength, and something else she hadn't seen before. Belief. In her. The aircraft dipped lower. The escorts tightened formation. The PA crackled again, full of strain and urgency. Elaine extended her hand. Come with me, she said. It's time to expose who's really behind this. Sarah took a breath that felt like stepping across a threshold she could never return from. Then she took Elaine's hand. The moment Sarah stepped back into the cockpit with Elaine, the tension sharpened like a wire pulled taut. Captain Willis and First Officer Green looked up from the panels. No panic, no shock. Just the grim understanding of men who knew the situation had outgrown the aircraft they were flying. The marshal followed them in, closing the door with the deliberate click that sealed them into a chamber thick with consequences. Elaine didn't waste a breath. Captain, what's our landing vector? Willis pointed to the navigation screen, where a new route had been force-overridden in bright red. They're directing us to a restricted strip outside Fort Worth, federal landing zone. We won't be touching a commercial runway today. Green muttered, and we have armed escorts on the wings. That's a first. Sarah hovered near the jump seat, unable to stop shaking. First the sabotage, then Burnett, then the fighters outside their windows. Now a landing zone she'd never heard of. None of this felt real. None of it felt survivable. Captain Willis glanced back at Elaine. If they're forcing us down on a federal strip, it means they think whoever breached the system is still active. They're preparing to detain everyone involved. Elaine nodded slowly. Yes. And if we don't intervene before touchdown, they'll take Sarah first. Sarah flinched. Her voice barely escaped her lips. Why me? Why am I the one they're coming for? Green answered before Elaine could. Because your ID was used. Because Burnett used your name. Because everything points to you unless someone proves otherwise. The marshal stepped closer to Sarah. And someone inside the airline wants it that way. Elaine turned toward the captain. We need access to the secure channel, the one linked directly to ground oversight. I need to override the active report before they classify her as the primary perpetrator. Willis hesitated. I can't open that channel without authorization. Elaine met his gaze. You have authorization. From me. Green blinked. Who exactly are you? Elaine held his stare. The federal liaison responsible for overseeing security breaches tied to the transportation network. And the person tasked with identifying the internal mole who used this aircraft as a courier. Everything inside the cockpit seemed to tilt. The marshal confirmed it with a quiet nod. Green exhaled hard. All this time, you were evaluating us. Elaine corrected him. I was evaluating your airline. But today, one of your own forced the situation. Sarah clenched the armrest, voice breaking. Burnett said my supervisor was involved, that I was being set up, that the plan was already in motion before the audit. Elaine turned fully toward her now, her expression losing the hard professional edge for the briefest flicker. He's right. You were targeted. Because you were consistent, steady, invisible. The kind of employee whose background no one questions. Sarah whispered, Why would someone do that to me? Because they needed a shield, Elaine said softly. A person whose spotless record could hide their crimes until the transfer was complete. Willis switched the aircraft to a lower altitude corridor. The engines adjusted, the pitch deepening. Sirens flickered across the HUD as new messages arrived from ground authorities. Green scanned them, face tightening. They're escalating. They want names. Now. Elaine stepped toward the comm panel. Then we give them the right names. The marshal moved beside her, guarding her movements. Willis nodded and flipped the protective cover off the secure channel switch. Sarah watched Elaine's hands move across the controls, entering a code sequence she had no right to know unless she occupied a position far beyond what the passengers believed. In the silence that followed, the aircraft felt suspended between two worlds. Elaine spoke into the encrypted comm. Her voice was steady, precise. This is Agent Harper, Federal Liaison for Transit Security Oversight. Confirm clearance code Alpha 72. A burst of static. Then a voice returned, sharp, authoritative, surprised. Agent Harper, we received no confirmation you were on this flight. That's because certain members of your office weren't meant to know, Elaine replied. I'm invoking full protocol override. The primary suspect on board is not the person your system flagged. Sarah's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. Willis whispered under his breath, Here we go. Then who is the primary suspect? The voice demanded. Your report is incomplete. Elaine's eyes flickered to Sarah, then to the marshal, then back to the panel. The suspect is an internal operative embedded within Liberty American Airlines, a person who placed a data transfer module on this aircraft before departure. The operative is not a flight attendant, not a passenger, and not a member of the cabin crew. Green's breath released in a slow, shaky exhale. Sarah grabbed the edge of the console as her legs weakened. Elaine continued, voice colder now, slicing through the cockpit like a blade. The operative is a corporate entity, a senior-level administrator within the airline security division. The same person who initiated the audit request under false credentials. The cockpit fell dead silent. Even the engines felt quieter. Sarah felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Who did this to me? Elaine turned from the comm. Her expression had changed. Harder, sharper, resolute. The person who left you the voicemail this morning, she said softly. Sarah's stomach collapsed in on itself. My supervisor. Elaine nodded, but she wasn't finished. And he's not just framing you, she added. He's waiting for us to land so he can finish the job. The marshal swore. Green paled. Willis gripped the controls tighter. Sarah couldn't move. Elaine stepped closer, lowering her voice so only she could hear. "He needed you implicated," she said, "because the data leak traces back to him. Because you were the only one who saw something strange weeks ago and didn't realize its meaning. Because you were close enough to notice." Sarah shook her head. "No, I didn't notice anything." Elaine's gaze deepened. "Yes," she said, "you did." The aircraft shuddered as the escorts repositioned. Willis steadied the flight path. "Agent Harper," the voice crackled over the secure channel. "Prepare for immediate landing. Authorities will meet the aircraft." "Confirmed," Elaine replied, then clicked off. She looked at Sarah once more, and this time, her voice wasn't sharp or authoritative or cold. It was honest. "Your supervisor knows you're the only loose thread he didn't cut," she said. "And if we don't expose him before this aircraft touches the ground, you won't just be blamed." Sarah's heartbeat stopped for a long, terrible second. Elaine finished quietly. "You'll be erased." The tires screamed against the tarmac as the aircraft hit the ground harder than any landing Sarah had felt in 30 years. The jolt snapped every passenger upright, oxygen masks swinging like pendulums, overhead lights flickering in violent bursts. Captain Willis held the controls with both hands, muscles rigid, guiding the aircraft across the restricted strip marked with stark white government insignias. Outside the windows, armed vehicles raced alongside them, keeping pace with the descending roar of engines winding down. The escorts peeled away into the grey sky. The plane slowed again, then shuddered into stillness. Silence followed. Heavy, trembling silence. Then the marshal spoke first. "Agent Harper, they're surrounding the aircraft." Elaine didn't move. She stood in the cockpit doorway, eyes focused on the line of black SUVs forming a barricade around the plane. Her voice was calm, but something beneath it carried a cold edge. "They're not here to help. Not yet." Sarah's breath wouldn't steady. Her pulse thrashed. Her entire body trembled with the echo of Burnett's confession and the promise that her supervisor was waiting for this exact moment. Green powered down the remaining systems while Willis listened to the flurry of orders coming through the comms. "Federal Command wants all flight crew to stay put," Willis said tightly. "They'll escort you off the aircraft in groups." "No," Elaine said. Willis turned. "Excuse me?" "If they separate us," she continued, "your flight attendant will be isolated, and whoever orchestrated this breach will make their move before we can stop them." Sarah felt the cockpit shrink, her vision tunneling as fear tightened its cold fingers around her lungs. I can't be taken alone." "You won't be," Elaine said, "but I need you to trust me." The marshal stepped beside her. "Tell us the plan." Elaine looked at him hard. "We walk out together, all 5 of us, straight into the custody of the ground task force. No deviations, no hesitation." Green frowned. "How does that help?" "Because," Elaine said, "your supervisor is among them." The words crashed through the cockpit like a sudden drop in altitude. Sarah felt her knees weaken. "He's here?" "He requested to join the task force the moment the alert flagged you," Elaine said. "He needed to be present to control the narrative." Willis muttered, "That's not procedure." "It is," Elaine replied, "if you're high enough in the internal security chain to grant yourself access." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "What is he going to do?" Elaine met her eyes. "He's going to try to finish what he started, to neutralize the only witness who could link him to the breach." The marshal's expression hardened. "Then he'll have to go through me." "No," Elaine said softly. "He'll go through her. Unless we expose him first." She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're going to tell them the truth, all of it. And you're going to say it in front of him." "I can't," Sarah whispered. "He'll twist it. He'll bury me." That's why I'm standing beside you, Elaine said, and why the marshal is standing beside me. Willis exhaled, resigned. Then let's move. They opened the cockpit door. The passengers looked up with a collective inhale, as if the fate of the entire aircraft waited on the next breath. Sarah felt the weight of 100 eyes following her as she walked the aisle, the marshal close behind, Elaine leading with a quiet force that steadied the trembling inside her. At the front exit, the door opened to a wash of hot Texas wind. Armed federal agents lined the tarmac, standing in rigid formation. A man stepped forward from the group, her supervisor, Markham Riley, gray suit, silver badge, the same voice that left her that message that morning. He smiled at her, a polite, practiced smile she had mistaken for decency for years. "Ms. Thompson," he said warmly, "I'm glad you're safe. We have a lot to discuss." Elaine stepped between them like a blade sliding into place. "Agent Harper, Transit Oversight. Effective immediately, this flight crew is under federal protection. No personnel are to be separated." Markham's smile didn't move, but his eyes flickered with something sharp. "Agent Harper? I wasn't aware this flight carried federal observers." "That was the point," she answered. The marshal handed over Burnett in cuffs, giving Markham a long, deliberate stare. "Your breach suspect." Markham's eyebrows lifted in feigned surprise. "A 70-year-old engineer managed to infiltrate your systems. Impressive. But Ms. Thompson's credentials," Elaine cut in, "were stolen, forged, and used to disguise the real source of the breach." Markham's expression tensed for the briefest second. So brief no one would have caught it except those looking for it. Elaine stepped closer. "Your security division logged a secondary audit that wasn't approved by federal oversight. That audit flagged Ms. Thompson before today's incident. An audit you personally initiated." Markham's jaw tightened. "You're mistaken." "No," Elaine said. "I'm not." She pulled the device from her pocket, burnished steel, government issued. She tapped a file. A projection activated, displaying a time-stamped message, a digital signature, and a name. Markham Riley. Green whispered behind Sarah. "He forged the audit." The marshal took a step forward, posture shifting. Willis exhaled through clenched teeth. Sarah's breath froze. Markham didn't blink. "You have no proof that I intended harm." Elaine's voice softened, almost gentle. "Burnett confessed your involvement before we disabled the transfer. He said you built the shadow node, that you pocketed payments for data access, that you framed your own employee to hide the breach." Markham's mouth tightened into a hard line. "Burnett will say anything under pressure. He's a liability." "And you planned to eliminate that liability," Elaine said, "along with the woman who unknowingly threatened your cover." Sarah felt something inside her snap. "No," she said, her voice trembling at first, then strengthening as fear loosened its grip. "You didn't choose me because I was reliable. You chose me because you thought I would be too small to fight back." Markham's mask cracked. Just a fracture, but enough. The marshal moved. In seconds, weapons raised, federal agents closed in, hands gripping Markham's arms, forcing them behind his back. His composure evaporated into rage. "You're making a mistake," he shouted. "She was compromised. She was the weak link." Elaine stepped in, her voice like steel cooled in ice. "No, Mr. Riley. She was the one person on your roster who didn't bend. And that's why your entire plan falls apart." As they pulled him away, Sarah's knees nearly gave. The marshal caught her by the arm, steadying her. Elaine looked at Sarah with a quiet, resolute nod. "You weren't meant to break," she said. "You were meant to reveal the truth." The sun rose higher over the airfield, washing the tarmac in fierce white light. The crisis dissolved into movement, agents dispersing, passengers disembarking, crew giving statements. But Sarah felt none of it. She felt only the weight lifting from her chest, piece by piece, until she could breathe again. Elaine stood beside her, arms folded, watching the last SUV disappear down the strip. "You'll need to give a formal statement," she said, "but you're clear. Completely." Sarah exhaled shakily. "Thank you. I still don't understand why you stood up for me." Elaine looked at her, eyes steady. "Because people like Riley win when people like you stay quiet. And today, you didn't." The wind carried the faint scent of jet fuel through the silence. Sarah closed her eyes and let the moment settle into her bones. Elaine stepped back. "Take some time off. Reclaim your life. Then decide what you want to do with the truth you helped expose." Sarah nodded, tears burning but not falling. The story wasn't just hers anymore. It never had been. And for the first time, she understood the power of stepping into the light. If this chapter moved you, like the video, subscribe for more stories, and comment 3 words: Rise with Truth.